I've been away this past week. Last Saturday, I went to El Salvador for a week as part of a faith delegation of GLBT faith leaders to go and observe human rights activities that were taking place there, to advocate for the rights of gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender people who, under the law there, have no protections at all. And it's a very violent place, and I'll say this, it is literally true that the murder of transgender people in particular, many of whom are sex workers, go entirely unpunished and uninvestigated. Entirely. There is no consequence for those who commit crimes against transgender people in El Salvador at this time. So that's one reason why I was there. I was there to be in solidarity with people and also to participate in a great commemoration of Archbishop Oscar Romero, a great liberation theologian who was assassinated in 1980 and whose writings and example had a profound impact on me and many people of my generation. We went into ministry conscious of his example, believing that our faith gave us the courage and the vision to change the world and to fight injustice. So to be able to participate in this great commemoration in the Metropolitan Cathedral in downtown San Salvador, to be at his grave, and to see that even though the Catholic Church there has repudiated Archbishop Romero and the legacy of liberation theology and tried to erase his memory, each year on the anniversary of his death, the people rise up and recall his memory. To be there and to be present for that was a great faith moment. And I'm telling you all this because one thing I hadn't anticipated is that I went there conscious that though I did not represent Cathedral of Hope in any official way, what a blessing it was to be able to tell the people I met with, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and their allies, about a great church in Dallas, Texas, where each week people gather to worship in Spanish and in English, and to carry on the legacy of liberation that, though invisible at this time to them in El Salvador, was influenced by people like Oscar Romero. And to be able to tell them, we have our own church where we are safe. To be able to tell them about this place called Hope was such a tremendous gift. And I just wanted to tell you that at the beginning. If you ever are tempted to take this place for granted, I urge you to just spend a minute thinking about what it would be like not to have it, or what it would be like to live in a place where people live in daily fear of their physical safety and where religion as a force in society is against them. That may help you recall how important Cathedral of Hope is. What we are doing here matters, and I hope you feel that. And I just wanted to acknowledge that before I talked about this Bible passage, which the experience of being in El Salvador is still very present to me. I'm not even sure how much of it I'll talk about this morning, some. But I ask your prayers for the people there. See, they think that nobody notices. Nobody is aware of what's happening to them in that place. And we all know what that can feel like too. So pray for them and for their liberation. This morning we want to look at the story from John 9 it's always called in the commentaries, the story of the man born blind, because like many cool characters in the Bible, there is no name for this person. The best characters, the best spiritual examples in the Bible are sometimes people whose names we never know, sometimes because the Bible has a patriarchal bias, and so many female characters never get names because it wasn't important to the people who compiled the book. That doesn't make them any less valuable. And other people who were on the social margins, the people about whom Jesus cared the most, sometimes their stories are here without names. And though this does not make up for it, I believe that the characters without names in particular are the ones that we are invited to identify with the most. The nameless ones have our names in them, and our story is here. And this theme that we're looking at during Lent right now is testify to love Jesus in each of the stories that we're looking at each week. Last week, the woman at the well. Next week, Lazarus, and other stories in this cycle are all stories in which Jesus turns his life into a testimony about love. And it has consequences of healing and liberation for people around him. And also, Jesus, I believe, loves his way into resurrection on Easter. When you read the stories in John's Gospel, it's a sequence of events in which Jesus' gradual awareness of the power of love that is stronger than death, that Pat just talked about, enables him to live into resurrection on Easter in a way that makes it natural, inevitable, and I believe for us, replicable as well. These 5 stories in John's Gospel are the best in the Bible, and this story is one of them. So it starts off with this detail. As Jesus walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. And in the first episode, there are 8 episodes in the story, only 3 of which we printed in the program this morning. People begin speculating, religious people, well, what caused this blindness that this young man suffers from or lives with? Is it something that he did or something that his parents did? Now, this is a peek into the mind of the pathological religion that many of us were raised in, or of the families in which we were raised too, as if everything has to have blame, as if everything is somehow meant to judge. Jesus challenges this notion head on. Illness is not caused by God. I want to say that very clearly, because you know when this Bible story came alive for me especially was first coming out as a gay man, when homosexuality was seen as an illness scientifically in the 1970s, in particular when I was coming out. And then as we emerged and evolved as a society, when AIDS emerged on the scene, people often would say AIDS was caused as God's punishment. When I say this, I remind us of this history this week, in the last few weeks when Fred Phelps just died. That discourse was real, and it hurt people to be taught or told that God punishes through illness. It's an old heresy. Jesus rejects it head on. It's like he says there are 2 kinds of people in the world: people who look for reasons to blame or judge, or people who regard life circumstances as opportunities to see God's presence at work. Which are we? And so Jesus says, you're looking at this all wrong. And let me say this here and now in 2014. God does not punish through illness. God is present in illness with us as we suffer and as we transcend both. So the next episode happens conscious in this story so far. Everyone's talking about the blind man, but nobody's talking to him. In the second episode, Jesus and the blind man actually interact. And I love this because here's Jesus learning something right now. He walks up to him, he engages him, he listens to his life circumstance, treats him like a fellow human being, understands that people see the blind man in one way, and yet the blind man knows many things because he's invisible to them. and he understands his circumstance, so he engages in an act of sort of homeopathic healing, I guess is the best way to say. He makes mud, puts it on his eyes, says, "Go bathe in the pool at Siloam." And when the man comes back, he's able to see. Now, this is one of those things that I think is a moment where their personalities are revealed. One who could no longer see can see. And do we see next a scene of great celebration? Yay, wonderful, how cool. No, it becomes more grist for judgment and doubt and finger pointing. This is not the kind of religion we want to model. This is not a testimony to love. This is the kind of pathological religion that destroys the spirit and is worse than any physical malady. It says about him that the neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Was this the guy who was blind, who used to sit and beg?" And others were saying, "Well, maybe, I'm not sure." See, they never talked to him. They talked about him. They walked around him. But he wasn't a real person to them. And any oppressed group, any marginalized group who has not been seen, or any individual who knows what it's like to be ignored, not seen, understands how this blind person now becomes the one who teaches the ignorant and the religious, which are the same thing in this story. So finally, someone says, "Who are you? Are you this one?" And he says, it's not until we're at the 10th verse, "That's me, yoo-hoo, person in the room. I am the one that you've been talking about but not talking to for a long time." And they said, "Well, what happened? How were your eyes opened?" And he gives them the direct, simple answer: "Jesus touched me, and now I see." And they hate that. They're not celebrating. There's no joy of the Lord here. They're just cranky and critical and unhappy about this miracle that has taken place. And I lift up this example because I remember what it was like for gay communities to find their voice and to celebrate with great pride. For people with AIDS to learn that we, though perishing in the body, are strong in the spirit. And to have people respond with, "Wah, wah, 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 wah." You would think that evangelical Christians and Roman Catholic Christians, the two groups of people most obsessed with homosexuality, would rejoice when people find their healing, rather than use it as an excuse to reinforce their judgment and an opportunity to exercise control in society by legislating their morality into law. This man born blind is our hero because he did not allow their doubt, their cynicism, their fear of him, their ignorance of him to control him or to prevent his miracle from happening. And I want to say this about why I love this story too. I don't think this is metaphor. I do believe that somehow, medically hard to account for, perhaps, Jesus healed him. I believe in the faith-healing stories of the Bible, and I want to urge you to suspend your disbelief if you can't quite embrace belief in them. Because though I revere medical science, so many times I, in my own life, and I've seen it in the lives of others, experienced the power of spirit in concert with medicine to do something that no one could have anticipated. It isn't over till it's over. I had 4 eye surgeries, so I'm perhaps particularly identify with this story. And you've seen me now, you've been with me for 7 months. I still have a wonky eye that has a mind of its own. As the doctors used to say, well, taken individually, your eyes are each of them fine, but they just don't work together very well. So after each of these surgeries, I remember, being the gauze and, the unwrapping and a certain initial disappointment when I realized, well, that didn't do what they thought it would do. But always accompanied with this, oh my God, I can see. Wrap your eyes up for 2 weeks at a time and then unwrap them and see if you don't appreciate even a wonky eye or two. Science doesn't do it all. I know that there are other people who have this testimony here, but when you tell this story in church, you have to go there with it. I had a terminal illness diagnosis with HIV that really I should have been done well over 15 years ago, in which case I would have missed the wonderful opportunity to be with you this year in Dallas. And do you know what? Still here. And many of you are still here. Life unfolds continuously, and there is miracle opportunity available in every moment. And I say this as a person who has been with people during their final transitions many times. You know what? Miracle and revelation happen every single moment. Sometimes people will draw a line in the sand. This was very common in the AIDS years when AIDS was terminal. And say, well, I have this bag of pills in my drawer, and if it ever gets to the point where, say, I lose my sight, was a common one with CMV, they said, well, then I will definitely exercise my own agency and my life. And then that would happen. I remember one guy in particular, he told me this very clearly. I went to visit him right after he had lost his sight, and he was taking Braille lessons, even though he had already said, lose my sight, that's it. And I saw people move that line over and over and over again, because every moment is susceptible to divine revelation. And you don't want to miss anything if you're tuned into that. This is the kind of faith that is embedded in this story. So in then the 4th little episode, this is after the part that was left off, that was printed in the program. The religious people come as a group to examine what has gone on here, and I know this is part of it still, and they just can't accept what has gone on. They say, well, what happened? And Jesus, he says, well, as I've explained before, Jesus touched my eyes, and now I can see. And they said, they can't. He's a sinner. And finally they say to him, well, what do you think? It was your eyes that were healed. Finally, someone asked him that. His opinion in the 17th verse of the story, his theological insight. So much more fun to talk about people than to talk to them, isn't it? He says, Jesus is a prophet. And what is a prophet? A prophet is one who sees possibilities that others do not see. A prophet is one who senses things maybe before they happen, but which are already unfolding. A prophet is one who is certain that liberation and resurrection is inevitable, and that where there's any possibility of motion toward that, then it can still unfold. So to the blind person who is supposed to be ignorant, this Jesus brought revelation. To the religious people who had strongly held, rigid convictions about the role of people that they should be assigned to, he was a sinner. I don't know about you, I'll take the testimony of the blind man over the testimony of the religious people. And then it just goes from bad to worse. Be sure to go and read the rest of the story because there's a great deal of humor in it. The religious people go to his parents because they're unsatisfied with this answer. Is this your son who they say was born blind? And the parents answer, yes, of course it's our son. And then they say, well, what happened here? And they say, don't ask us. He's of age. There's probably not enough therapy for that family at this point. But I say this with some sympathy. Having listened to many parents who have agonized over why they have a gay child, convinced that they did something wrong. Not because they thought they had done something wrong, but because religion, or Dr. Spock, remember that, the behavioral guy, not the Star Trek one. He wouldn't have said that. Told them that they did something wrong. The burden that parents carry, which is not so visible today, but which was very tangible in a prior generation. I want to say to them, be set free. Be set free. You did nothing wrong. We learned how to love because of how you loved us. We did not learn to be gay because of some mistake you made. And then the story continues. There's just, more drama. The blind man interacts with the Pharisees. They keep questioning him. How could this have happened? Finally, he says to them in a classic smart aleck moment, it really sounds to me like you want to become one of Jesus' disciples. You have strong interest in his teachings. And so then they kick him out of the church in the ways of Christians. They don't like humor, and they don't like criticism. This story is about a healing. It's about a restoration. And in it, Jesus intends to teach this, that worse than the lack of physical sight is ignorance. Ignorance is a kind of blindness. And that is also susceptible to healing, but it's far worse than the kind of blindness that is being experienced by the blind man. He teaches them because he refuses to be invisible or silent anymore. He tells his testimony, and it changes him, and it changes them. His Easter comes early. The prouder he becomes, the more certain in his testimony, the clearer his resurrection is. And I want to lift that up to you. You have a testimony. If you have ever been treated as disposable or invisible, you have a testimony that is life-saving for you and for the people who hear it, even if they take it in, and it means a change in society is necessary. It was not coincident that all through the 1980s, our government ignored people with HIV and their plight and used this language when refusing continually money for treatment and for research. They said in Congress, we have a disposable population, and God is helping us rid ourselves of it. At the same time, our government in El Salvador, our government, the United States government, was funding the military regime for fear that it would become communist, that led to the death of 75,000 civilians. And we never talked about it in the United States to the extent that we should have. 2 silences simultaneously taking place. The disposable and the disappeared, which was the language that they used in El Salvador. The time is now over for there to be disposable or disappeared in our society. And we are compelled by the example of the person born blind, and by our comrade in faith, Jesus Christ, to speak up in the silences and to proclaim love, and also to proclaim social change if necessary, to make sure that no one is ignored, disregarded, disposed of, or seen as unworthy of protection for their humanity. I went to El Salvador to be reminded of what I already knew, and to promise them that I would come back here and tell you their story, and also to ask you for your prayers for them, and to invite all of us to live into the power of resurrection that Jesus models, but that others have as well. Archbishop Oscar Romero, 2 weeks before his death: I have frequently been threatened with death. I must say that as a Christian, I do not believe in death, but in the resurrection. If they kill me, I will rise again in the people of El Salvador. I am not boasting. I say it with the greatest humility. But I wish that they could realize they're wasting their time if they try and kill me. A bishop will die, but the Church of God, the people, will never die. Jesus Christ lives. Oscar Romero lives today through the people of El Salvador, and we have an opportunity to live and love justice into reality. Amen.